Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com, and we are coming together to the studio again at 2 o'clock, and we come together on this program every Monday from 2 o'clock to 3. And we're proceeding the program called Satura's Black History Corner every second and fourth Mondays. They're not here today because this is not the second and fourth Mondays. But they will be here on those Mondays. You can count on it. We're just coming together again. I just enjoy coming to the studio a little early and sitting down with the team and picking up some points. John is always very studious. And John, I got to ask you a question today. I got to see if I can stump this guy today. I got a question for him. Later on in the program, I'm going to ask him a question, see if I can find his stumping me. He's always asking me these questions and stumping me because I don't know. I'm just coming to the studio as a person that went to school and got 3 degrees, and what did I learn? I'm sitting in the classroom on the people up there in front of the classroom. I'm writing down this stuff and then feeding it back to them and getting a degree for it.
By the way, why don't you tell people, in case they're newcomers to the show, what your background is in? You were an educator for 39 years in a public school.
Yeah, I am most proud of the fact that I did work in the public school system for 39 years, John. And I started out at they call it junior high school then. I don't know if they even call schools junior high schools anymore, but I was working in a school in the Beecher School District, and I started out in 7th grade. They had 7th, 8th, and 9th grade in the called it junior high school. And when I started that career, I really hadn't planned to be in that district as long as I was. I was there for 39 years, but my intention was to wait until my first class that I taught had graduated, and since it was 7th grade, I was going to stay there 5 years, let them get through school. I was going to wait for them to graduate, then leave and go somewhere else. And then it became another 5 years, and before I knew it, I was there 39 years. And on the during my career there, I saw myself only being in the classroom. And in my 36th year, I got a call from the superintendent asking me if I would be the go-to guy. And I thought that might have been something that had to do with my background in economics. And they wanted me to chair another committee that I was chairing committees. I didn't know that they offered me the principalship because they didn't say principalship, they said the go-to guy. And I had been the go-to guy in some other situations, and so I thought that's what they were offering. So I said yes, and let me know later on what you want me to do. And I went out and had dinner, and when I came back, I got all these phone calls, and people were saying, "George, congratulations." And I'm saying, "Congratulations for what?" And they said, "Because we went to the board meeting, and the board confirmed you unanimously as the principal of the high school for the coming school year." And I said, "What?" They didn't mention that. Because I saw myself, I had been in the classroom 36 years. I never even thought about, going out of the classroom. I started in the classroom, and I don't even want to tell you the year that I started, but it was 1966. And 36 years later, I was still in the classroom. I never saw myself being away from the educational component, in terms of the classroom. And that was really stunning that I was given principalship without my knowledge. I don't know what I would have said if they had said it up front.
But what I think is too, the reason why I'm having you do this and asking these kind of questions is because some people are, you never know who's just going to be joining.
Yeah, that's true.
And another thing is too, Beecher School District, if many people are unaware, back in the 1950s, it suffered a huge tragedy. 1953,
right.
A tornado had swept through the area, and the loss of life was significant. It was horrifying, and it was considered the 10th most deadly tornado to this date.
Yes,
and in the United States, and then also for some reason this Beecher was like ground zero for a lot of racial strife going on during the desegregate. Largely, the school Flint really did have desegregated schools before the 1960s. They really did, but some schools are still more white, but there was no real laws creating that.
Yeah.
And so for some reason, Beecher did have a lot of violence and a lot of strife going on, and you came in just as that was going on.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I really didn't, I was not from the area. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, so I wasn't from this area. So I'm coming in from my undergrad. I had 1 degree at this time, and I came into the district, and I was coaching basketball and football and teaching 7th grade. And in going into the suburban schools, we were part of the Big Nine at that time. The conference was called the Big Nine, and we were which was the larger school districts in the county. We're all Class A schools by size. And I was going out to these suburban schools and coaching, and all of them were telling me everywhere I would go, George, you must be catching it out there. Boy, I can imagine what you're going through. So I'm not from the area, but I'm not having all the problems they're talking about. So I came back into the district because they pricked my interest in what was going on. Maybe I wasn't paying attention. And I had some great relationships with the students, and so I thought that was, I didn't know what they were saying. So I came back because I was hearing it everywhere, and I began to kind of look around to see what was going on. Or maybe I was missing something. And but I kept getting these warnings and all of that. But I really, I was young and energetic, had a lot of energy. And, I don't know, I just had a certain demeanor when I was in my youth. Not so much in my older days, but in my youth I had a lot of energy, and I imported that in my classroom. And I'd have classes where the bell would sound and nobody would move, and because we didn't have that kind of a class. And I would say, okay, you can leave, but they would. But some of them, this also happened in high school. In high school, they wouldn't leave, and I mean they would just sit there, and just a lot of things that went on. But I had a great career out there, and I want to give a shout out to the Beecher School District, and I do agree with them. They say out there that once a Buccaneer, it's called the Beecher Buccaneers, and they say once a Buccaneer, always a Buccaneer, and I can attest to that because I've taught at 4 colleges on a part-time basis. I think 4 or 5 colleges, and I see myself as a Buccaneer, although I've been at some of the major universities, but I do not see myself in that role, although I have a lot of affinity for, you see me wearing the cap here, I have some affinity for the department I was in at the university. But because I was there so long and I was involved in so many different families out there, that I see myself as a Buccaneer, and I'm still a Beecher Buck, although I've been away from that school district now since 2005, and this is 2017. So I've been away from it for 12 years, but I'm still a Buck out there, and I think they know, once you're a Buccaneer, you're always a Buccaneer. Okay, I came here to the studio basically to talk about the situation that occurred last week, in which I know all of you heard about by now, and that is a situation that occurred in Alexandria, Virginia. And I was in that city when I went to the Glenn Beck rally in 2000, and this is 2017. I think Glenn Beck had his rally in 2010. Does that sound right? And so I stayed in a hotel in Alexandria, and then drove into, or took, I think we took a cab your ride into the Capitol. And it would be very surprising that something would go on in that city. It's a very clean town, suburban community, and low crime rate, so you wouldn't expect anything to happen in Alexandria, Virginia, and that's probably why they would not normally have had any security there with the congressman practicing for a charitable baseball game. The reason why they had 2 officers armed with revolvers, which really that's no match for a guy that's carrying a rifle, but who expects that? But the reason why they had anybody that was armed at the scene was because they had Scalise that was there, and he is the House majority leader, and when you have one of the officers of the Congress that is out in the public, then that person is given security. If he had not been there, they would not have had insecurity, and that would have been a turkey shoot. But what I want to talk about for a few minutes is what happened in the aftermath of this this carnage. You know how you try to act like that this just simply happens out of whole cloth and nobody's responsible for it, or you do what Charles Todd did. I think he's on NBC with the program called Meet the Press. You either say that everybody, like he did, everybody, we're all responsible for this, and you hear that when the person that did the shooting would have come out of a lot of this liberal nonsense that we're hearing about the Russians having selected the candidate for us, and we didn't vote for him, but the Russians decided that he'll be president of the United States. And you know, there's some people that are on the edge, and I do contend that all the persons are left on the edge to some extent, because I have read Lyle Rossiter's book called Liberalism, and he does a good job in his book. Rossiter is a medically trained doctor. He does a pretty good analysis on the liberal mindset, and I take his views of it. Not just his views, I take some of the others that have written about the liberal mindset as well. And I think it's just on the brink. I just don't think I think you can push that mindset. And when that happened, and this guy's wall had one venomous coming after another, really to me it sounded like what I hear on, not that I listen to him a lot, but when I turned on CNN, I thought when I went on his wall to read what he wrote, it looked like I was at a regular conference of those persons they have on CNN denying that Donald Trump is legitimate president. So whatever he was saying on his wall, I heard that on MSNBC and CNN and NBC and all that the alphabet soup cable stations. But when this happened, it was interesting that Chuck Todd and some of the others were going to say, well, you know, we're all guilty of it. And whenever I hear liberals say that, I know automatically what they're doing is trying to get away from any culpability in what occurred based upon the liberalese that goes on out here in terms of them out here making all these comments about Donald Trump not being a legitimate president. And they got these people who can that will believe anything, that believe that people in Moscow would have influenced how people voted in this country just because of what? What is the evidence? And you can tell them over and over again there is no evidence, and they keep on coming on the posts on Facebook where I post things every day, and they won't take no for an answer, although no is the answer. There is no evidence of any collusion on the part of Russia. And I said last week here at the studio, and I'll say it again, because I think I can verify this based upon a lot of the circumstantial evidence, and that is that Russia didn't give out any of the WikiLeaks information. That wasn't Russia, and Julian Assange just said it was not Russia. So if you've been paying attention and you can put 2 and 2 together and add 4, know that the answer is 4, then you and connect the dots. You know then that it was not Russia based upon the denial of it. I think Julian Assange is an honorable person. And I don't think he was giving out anything about Hillary Clinton. As a matter of fact, that was not, in fact, something that should have been reported if they were doing their jobs in the New York Times and the Washington Post. But they weren't doing their jobs. They were too busy trying to downplay the candidacy of Donald Trump. And they didn't want anybody evening it up. And what Julian Assange was doing was, in fact, evening things up by, in fact, talking about some information they had on the former Secretary of State. Nobody want to talk about that. They want to do all this beating down on the Trump campaign. But Julian Assange was, in fact, leveling the playing field and not making anything up, was simply talking about those 32,000 emails that were erased. Nobody's interested in that. Nobody has to do an investigation of what that means and what kind of evidence was being covered up in that case and what kind of collusion might have been going on between the Clinton campaign and Russia, where there's evidence of that, no evidence of the other. Evidence that Loretta Lynch said in an investigation of Hillary Clinton, downplay it from saying publicly it's an investigation and saying that it's a matter. What is a matter? Everything matters. There's no matter's not it matters. The matter, it's a noun, or it matters, you could say is a verb. But since everything matters, the question is, what is mattering in this case here? And they wanted, what mattered was that there was an investigation that should have gone on to investigate Hillary Clinton's email situation, and they did not want that defined as an investigation. So Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General of the United States, said that it should be downplayed into just call it a matter. And in fact, James Comey took her advice and did that. Why isn't that being investigated? I mean, that is obstruction of justice for him to do that, because he took the investigatory angle of looking at this email situation, and then he downplayed it to something that shouldn't be investigated then. And then the other thing that James Comey did, no investigation has been called about this, but another thing that he did was he actually went down he did a 15-minute news conference. Most of you probably remember this. And he did a 15-minute news conference, and in that conference he went for about 14 of those minutes laying out a strong case that I thought that it was inevitable that the conclusion would be then, based on all these charges, that things he said that had occurred, I thought that it was a done deal, that he would then conclude that based upon what he was in fact laying out, a case had been made that Hillary Clinton should have been charged. And I think, quite frankly, and I don't really have any doubt about this, I've said this many times in public and I'll say it again here, and that is that the charge against Hillary Clinton should have been espionage. You can't convince me. I'm not going to be convinced.
And they can't claim ignorance. These are not people. These are not underlings. They're briefed fully on this.
Yes,
stuff.
they are, John.
Ramifications, reactions. They have legal counsel there. When they meet, they have people of all the tech support people. They have everybody there. They talk about what this for failing to do something would bring about. So
John,
there's no way she can say that she was ignorant of this.
Cannot say it with a C up there at the top of the confidential information, and it doesn't even mean confidential, it means classified. There's no claim of ignorance here. This is espionage on the face of it. And the payoff was in the way of the Clinton Foundation, which was a money laundering operations. You can go and read the book by Peter Schweiker's book. And Peter Schweiker does some great investigative work. The first book I read by him was the book called The Architects of Ruin. R-U-I-N. Yeah, they're the architects of ruin up there in Washington. These politicians have ruined this country. And what they don't don't get me started on that, but they don't care anything about this country. Politicians care about one thing and one thing only. Well, two things possibly. The first thing is they care about political power, and they care about it, the protection of it through the re-election process. They want to be elected and be re-elected. To maintain their political power. A
lot of philosophers and thinkers had real issues with democracy. One amongst them be like Nietzsche, and he said about basically he saw it being what it is now. I mean, people become too trusting or just basically too immersed with their own details of their living, or also the occupying themselves with all these non-events in their life. And the press creates these non-events to distract them largely. They do it. Well, I don't know if they actually do it, but they put out stuff out there. It's basically like it's like it's like holding a ball in front of a real eager dog, like a tennis ball. Wow! So they got their they're looking at something right here. They're looking at the newspaper thing, and they go wave this little ball. Oh, we got to play, and that's what it is with the human. Americans seems to be so easily distracted, and let's face it, the government's far worse than even the ultra right wing, what they'd say the right wing wing nut would think. I mean, or actually he's advocating or saying it is. It's far worse.
John, I have a book here, as a matter of fact, that says, this is written by Thomas DeLorenzo, another out of the box thinker, and he said the title of his book is Organized Crime. Now, unless you get the impression that he's talking about the mafia. Well, he is talking about the mafia, but he's not talking about the mafia he's not talking about the mafia that was in fact written about in the Valachi papers. Who was that? Joe Pahlavi.
Let me pull that up. I forget.
Yeah, the Valachi papers. I think it's Joe. Check that because I'll make sure I'm right here. But he's the first. Joe Pahlavi was the first. I think it's his name, John. Check me on that because I want to make sure I'm right in the name. I'm right about what's in the book. But it's been a while since I've read it. But I think his name is Joe Valachi. I'm gonna be very surprised if I'm wrong.
I think that was the guy who was the informant. Yeah, the informant. Yeah. The guy who actually came and told how things work. He was a turncoat, basically.
Yeah. See if he's the author of the book. Maybe Joe Valachi was. Maybe he was a turncoat. But I think Joe Valachi wrote the book, if I'm not mistaken. He's the one that stated. Gave the name of the mafia. We didn't even know what the name of the mafia was. We call it mafia as outsiders, but insiders they call it the Cosa Nostra.
Actually, the Valachi papers, he was written by Peter Moss.
Peter Moss.
Yeah, Peter Moss.
Peter Moss. Okay. Yeah, Joe Valachi was the informant.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Yeah, I knew it was one of them. Yeah, that book is very important. And what Joe Valachi did, you write the Valachi papers. What Joe Valachi did was to talked about what they call themselves inside of this close-knit fraternal group. And it is Cosa Nostra, meaning our thing, or this thing of ours.
Yeah, this thing of ours, yeah.
Yeah, this thing of ours. So, but you know, you have different things of ours in terms of different fraternal groups. And there's one fraternal group that we have that's he's talking about the organized crime. He's talking here about these gangsters in Washington.
But you see, the mafia's roots actually go back to Sicily, where they're all from. That's yes. Pretty common knowledge. Mm-hmm. They were actually invaded by so many waves of different invaders because they saw that as a key to continent to get to the continent of Europe. You know, the Europeans, as they used the Sicily or whatever to get into the country.
Yes.
So I mean, they were raided by the Arabs got in there, so did the other people. So basically, they were so protective because they had been beaten down so many times that at one time, particularly after the French occupied Sicily, they created somebody murdered somebody, a family member or something like that, and some Frenchman killed some Italian, some Sicilian, and they started this thing to resist the mafia was. Started what we call the mafia. The organization was a resistance against the French occupiers. Mm-hmm. So, but there was just a herd of, it's just like everybody's who's who of history passed through Sicily to get to the rest of Europe.
Yeah.
And so that was the genesis of all that.
Yeah, that's a very important point. When I think about the government, I think about the mafia, but I think about the legalized version of it, in terms of those people that have come in that understand that they need the cover of law for a lot of the things they're doing that are egregious, that there will be no penalty of it because it's like what Dinesh D'Souza said in his film about Hillary's America. He said that they do not get called on the copy by the system because, and he does a little pause in the film, he said because they own the system. And that's about the size of it. Donald Trump is, for all of his money, and I don't know how much money he has. Last week they said that the report he put out, I don't know if he put all his assets on the table, but it was $1.5 billion according to one report. But I think that might have been a partial placement of his assets in the public domain. Maybe the part that is in fact people are claiming is a violation of the emolument clause in the Constitution, that you're not supposed to enrich yourself because of your office as President of the United States. I don't know if that applies. I don't know if that applies to the Congress, members of Congress.
Let's see. The Clintons were disbarred politicians, lawyers, and their only career was how many millions are they worth? I mean, book deals.
Yeah.
Now, ask yourself, did those book deals actually net them that from sales? No. Most people do not read the biographies or books written by ex-presidents. Really don't.
Yeah.
So where's all this money coming from?
Right.
I mean, that's money they're reporting. We're not talking about money offshore accounts.
Right. And it's payment for something other than the books they're writing, because those books do not sell, John. Now, who wants to hear what these guys got to say? These guys are basically airheads. It's just like with Bill Clinton. Does anybody want to read or hear anything Bill Clinton got to say. Have you listened to this man?
Well, the thing is, I mean, if you would actually, I mean, I like this meme that goes up. I wish I could have had it beforehand. It's like, okay, all these millions of dollars for books, and basically, but when they're on the witness stand, when they're being testified or being grilled about something, the Clintons don't have recollection. So how can they have no recollection in front of Congress, but they can write these great tell-all books? I mean, I mean, what's in those books? I mean, the scandal details of, like, how many women Bill humped or whatever. I mean, that's basically what's, I mean, that's what it's all about. I mean, I don't understand anything.
They don't have any. They don't have respect for our intelligence, quite frankly, and that is why they do the things they do. I mean, can't recall when they are being called before committees to answer questions about what they did. They have this amnesia all of a sudden, but they have instant recall when they're sitting here writing this nonsense in these books, and they're not even getting paid for the books because those books are not going to make back the money that they're paying these persons for their memoirs. That is a payment for something else that they did when they were in office, and they're throwing these little caveats over there and giving them certain advantages and making policy that benefits this guy and close the other guy out, and that's payback. That the government, just like the mafia, they launder money. And I was saying earlier with the Julian Assange issue that this whole thing about Hillary Clinton and the cover-up, nobody's interested in the cover-up that's involved in that 20% uranium deal that was made that has Hillary Clinton's thumbprint all over it. And nobody's interested in investigating that. How these Russians, we're so concerned about the Russians interfering with elections in this country, but nobody's interested in the fact that 20% of the uranium, which is a basic material, radioactive material, you need to make nuclear weapons, and there is Russia allied with Iran and with Syria, and we are giving them 20%, making deals where they got 20% of the uranium reserves in this country, and nobody wants to investigate that, but want to investigate something that's made up. Well, Julian Assange did what the New York Times and the Washington Post did not do, and I was going to respond to what John said. John made a very interesting point about the media, and I would have to say that my education about the media didn't occur until 1977 when I read H.R. Haldeman's book. Haldeman was one of the president's men that was written about by these two. I found them very vulgar. I don't have any respect for Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, who wrote the book called All the President's Men. Those guys, along with Ben Bradley, and this is my view of it based upon all the documentation. I don't think anybody can come behind it and say otherwise. There was a coup d'etat in this country, and I have no problem toppling a government that's out of control, but I wanted to go through the processes that are set up by the Constitution of the United States. We have a way to remove presidents in this country.
See, that's the thing they're trying to do now. The left or the progressives, they're using the system, but they're really, if there's information or if there's evidence that is actually substantiated or whatever is the question. Yeah, I mean, I could see. Now, if they had it, I personally say I like some of the stuff that Trump wants to do. I do have problems with his personality. I think he is a flake. Okay, I say that. See, I'm not a person who can get behind anybody 100%.
Yeah.
Because I see their faults. I mean, I can't.
I see his faults.
But I see his faults. But I mean, whereas I have an issue with is that. They say, I had a friend screaming at me in a restaurant just a few weeks ago because you're down with the Trumpster, aren't you? You want? No, I said no. And I mean, finally, after he was spitting food all over me and stuff, and I said, hey, tell you what, if they got a case, let them build it. But guess what? I don't want manufactured evidence. And right. I guess, I mean, and the people who support Clinton, and as much as stuff has been tied to these people,
goodness.
The body count, simple. They're okay with that. That's all coincidental.
The body counts.
I mean, I can understand people die. And when you got a 20, 30-year course of political career, people around you are going to die. But look how many people died under the Clinton administration, both as president
that
and the time as governor.
That is a problem. That is a problem.
Nobody seems to be caring about that.
Well, that nobody cares about it because they're not going to investigate it. I was getting ready to say, as a matter of fact, on that point, that this Julian Assange has come out repeatedly and said that his information was not that from Russia, and I don't think Russia would have that information. The one that had the information was inside the DNC. And John, that was self-rich. The reason why I put that together, I mean, you can, anybody that, if you really are someone that, I consider myself to be an analytical person. And, you look at what occurred after Seth Rich's death, and then you look at earlier, you saw where Julian Assange was saying that he was not getting information from Russia. Well, who was he getting it from? Because that'd be from some inside school, somebody that had some information from it within. So it wasn't Russia. So who else would be within that that genre to be able to pull that out of some file and share that with Julian Assange, who then placed it in the public domain? Who would that be? And when Seth Rich was killed, I was very interested in who would make statements publicly and what would those statements reveal. And when Julian Assange came out, I sat back and said, oh, that is the connection. Because when Julian Assange came out and wanted to give reward money for the death of Seth Rich, that was a statement, undeniable statement. Because how many times has Julian Assange came out, and John was talking earlier about all these body bags that we've had to pull out and put people's bodies in that are being offed in this country because of organized crime in the federal government, and that is an organized crime unit, and don't ever doubt it. These people are gangsters.
Well, that didn't. I mean, and I'm a cynic about government, and skeptical. I was just talking to a guy years ago. This was about maybe 15 years ago. He was like 14 years ago, and he said, there's no difference between the mob and the mob and the government. There's very little. And I said, and I started thinking, you got to pay the government money to conduct business, otherwise they'll shut your business down.
Yeah.
You got to they'll use a disguise, a smoke screen of, we got to inspect your building to make sure there's no public safety hazards and all this. We got to make sure your wiring's up to code and all this stuff. Basically, and it's always attached a fee to it. Now, if it's so concerned about public safety, why don't they just come out to do it for free? They're supported already by tax base. What more do they additionally need?
Yeah.
And then you see these people. Then you see when these people leave office, these commissioners and all this stuff. They all have a safety net. They then go back into other government. Like councilmen usually go into some kind of other seat, state rep or whatever. Even if they did horrific job during the time of being So there is very little difference though between the mob and the government. They both have goons ready to punch you out, kill you, take you out. Of course, the government has like the legal process. They'll get paperwork to say that what they're doing to you is right, even though it violates everybody's perspective about morality. But it's legally correct. Remember, Hitler did what the Nazis did in Germany legally was right.
It was legal.
It was legal by German law at that time. So just because it's legal doesn't make it moral.
It doesn't make it morally right.
Most Americans seem to be okay with it, not even addressing that distinction.
Yeah, the government and the governments have been this way. That's one of the problems when you set government up. You set government up. This is Thomas Hobbes' idea. You set government up because you want to have some organized force in place to stop the bully. But as Jefferson and others, stated, that in doing that, and it's necessary to have some, maybe if you could get the people up to a level of ethical discourse, where people are more ethical, you could have persons that are self-regulating based upon their own honor. But we're not at that point. Can we agree on that? We're not at that point. I mean, how many persons got bars up their windows and doors? But since you need government under these circumstances, let's say it that way, you need government under these circumstances, then the question becomes, once you set up an organized force to stop the bully, then the question comes up of how then do you then prevent that which you set up to stop the bully from being a legal form, a legalized form of the bully. And that is the catch-22 that nobody's been able to figure out. The framers came closest to it than anyone in terms of what they tried to do, and they were brilliant in their attempts. But they had some folks coming after them, including themselves as well, I have a lot of respect for the framers, but I respect for them as theoreticians, as intellectuals. I don't have any respect for them as politicians, because politicians are pretty much the same where you find them, and that's even including those persons that wrote those tremendous documents for this country. The Declaration of Independence, first of all, and then later on, this tremendous document, the world had never seen it before, where they wrote the Constitution of the United States, where they taught, where it is a summation of their attempts to restrict power in this country.
Okay, and look at Jefferson. We brought him up in the show before last about how his start a couple of shows ago. How about he started abusing or started actually violating the very same principles he helped lay down. Another thing is too about he one time wrote so eloquently about the let the blood of tyrants water the tree of liberty or something like that or whatever. And the thing is that when he was in power and he started seeing that they were doing something that were angering the citizenry, he kind of backed down on that because he's one of them. Okay, so I mean that's the thing is it's like you will become, and that is the dilemma you have to worry about. We got a nation of over 300 million people, and there's a divergence. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a group of people assembled that ever actually had such diversity we have. Economic class, ethnic, racial, religious, non-religious, whatever. I mean, I don't think we've ever had that. The sheer numbers of that.
Yeah, John. If this experiment, democratic experiment. And I know people are going to tell me that we don't have a democracy with a Republican form of government. I understand that. But if this experiment could not work here at the very inception of the notion of it, starting with, and some people even say starting with George Washington, but I would give George Washington a pass in terms of all the great things he did otherwise, in terms of his relinquishing of power. Because if that does not, if he does not do that, it doesn't even get off the ground. So I give George Washington a lot of credit, and I think he's our only great president. As a matter of fact, I get a lot of arguments from scholars, and some of the person that they call themselves scholars in that domain. They want to put Lincoln up there at the top, and there's no way that's going. That is no way that's going to fly. That doesn't work here. You can put that on with somebody. That doesn't work here. Abraham Lincoln does not belong anywhere close to the top, and he actually is in terms of what this man did. I consider Abraham Lincoln. I'll say it on the air. I consider Abraham Lincoln to be a monster.
See, that's what I'm talking about. I can see that where your argument's from on that. But I also have at a time, I go back to the thing that if he hadn't kept the Union together and this country did go into separate ways, the chance of foreign people coming back in, establishing colonies or really influence, and let's face it, even the Confederacy established itself as a separate entity. It had a state of Confederate States. There would have been a foreign interest in there that would eventually overrode our own interest and our own way, our desire to have things our own way. So that's why he was kind of in a rock and a hard place. So I'm a little bit more charitable, and I can see he did horrific things. He did terrible things. I mean, he suspended the writ of habeas corpus for the entire course of the war. That's horrible.
Abraham Lincoln was, in my reading of history, was a monster, and. He had, I think that the reason why, he had bouts of depression, and I think the reason why that was true is because of some kind of thing he took for some ailment he had, and it had mercury in it. And there were bouts of manic depression this man had where he just go out of control. And there are scientists now looking at the medicinal, the things he took medicinally to cure himself of the problems that he had, and they think that his temperament was caused by that mixture what he was taking that had mercury in it. We know mercury, poisons the brain, and they think that would be attributed to it. But in the which of the 7 debates that he have with Stephen Douglas, where Douglas made an accusation against Lincoln, and Lincoln grabbed one guy that was close to the stage and was grabbing the guy, was out of control, and saying, "Tell him that's not true. You know that's not true. Tell him that's not." And people were just surprised that he lost it like that. I'm talking about the personality of Abraham Lincoln, and there has to be some kind of a quirk for a man to have. Intervened the way that he did, because it was never intended by the framers for this country to be held together by the bayonet. In other words, secession was the ultimate weapon the states could use if the federal authority got out of control and all the other checks and balances and restraints upon government did not in fact pretend their limited use of power. Then there was the ultimate thing was the fact that disassociate from the tyranny of the federal government, because the framers put that in there as a possibility. Don't forget now, each of these 13 colonists had come together to voluntarily set up the federal government. And what I would contend to those persons out there, this is for you scholars. Yeah, right. You know, I get a lot of people on my wall. I get a lot of people on my wall, my Facebook wall, thinking they come on my wall to teach me something about economics. One of my degrees is in economics. And I was in there teaching the class at that time.
I had somebody who was with the Occupy Wall Street one time. I mentioned about the Austrian school, and he laughed. He goes, "Well, that's been largely dismissed and disregarded." The Austrian school. Oh, really?
Yeah, really?
Really?
Not John Maynard Keynes?
Yeah. It's like, yeah, by him. Let's face it.
Give me a break.
You know, Keynes was basically, his quip was eventually we're dead. You know, and that's like, it doesn't. Basically, you're saying we don't matter how we run things, and that's a bizarre attitude to take when you're in a position of policy making. Essentially, I think that's just a bizarre, or in the formation. You know, helping to form public policy. And just like, because if you ever read about that sect that he was in set, the people, his social set, you read that biography. You know, you took it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. They were very detached, very ironic, almost like they were like this rude and arrogant people. That's the social set. They just thought they were above everybody else. They didn't think they were tied to anything. They didn't realize what said their lifestyles were buttered on. They're just rich, well pampered people. Mm-hmm. That's what they were.
John, it is amazing that people, you know, I get a lot of people come on my wall because what I'm saying is so far out of the ordinary and outside of mainstream. You know, I'm not mainstream, because I think that we have to go back and we have got to have a whole different tutoring in the country, because almost everything is like everything that you think that you know. What's that name of that book? Everything that I learned, that I needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten. It's everything that we have learned in these government-run schools. You know, almost all the information has to be examined, and it starts with Abraham Lincoln in a lot of ways, because Lincoln, I think, was I don't have any respect for Lincoln. Lincoln was attempting to disassemble the order in the South with the Emancipation Proclamation. This is not a proclamation of emancipation. This is a military document aimed at the South militarily, because they could not defeat the South. They had not defeated the South in the amount of time that they thought they would have had the South to lay down its weapons. And the South would not lay down its weapons because the North was in the South, and they were going to refute these invaders. In fact, that's what Robert E. Lee, who was the greatest soldier this country has produced. You can claim anything you want to.
Never owned a slave, I guess, and but Grant actually had 8 slaves because of his wife, through his wife's family. So, you know,
this history's got to be rewritten, John. It has to be rewritten.
And let's face it, Robert E. Lee's family was auspicious. I mean, they were from the founders onward. They were all part, and they were significant players in American history. You know, whereas Lincoln, I mean, and that's good. He came out of nowhere. That's, I guess.
Give me these men of honor, the people that are men of honor. They are attacking their monuments, and they're leaving the people that had no honor. You had 620,000 people killed in this country. There's only don't forget in a book written by Thomas Sowell, page 111 of the book, chapter 4. Called the Real History of Slavery is the title of the chapter. The title of the book, you get mad at if I give you the title of the book, so I'm not going to give you the title of the book, let you wouldn't find out. But because if I say that, then you're going to start doing more screaming than you're already doing. Not that I care about you screaming. You don't know what you're talking about. You're screaming at me, and you get your feelings hurt. That's what's going to happen. Come on my wall trying to argue points, because you've been in these tinfoil hat wearing professors' classroom learning this nonsense, and they want to holler about things that they were taught at these junior colleges. Every one of the colleges now is a junior college in this country. There are no major colleges, even Harvard University. You can't tell me anything about Harvard University. You got Larry Lessig over there talking about the Federalist Papers. Give me a break. The backup to stop a tyrant like Donald Trump from becoming president. So the Electoral College is set up to, in fact, suborn the verdict of the voters and to rescind the verdict of the voters and to place the person there of their choosing and not of the people's choosing. And that man said that in public and did not even seem to be embarrassed by it. You have to be embarrassed to say stuff like that. But you can say it to the layman, but you can't say it to me. And you get on my wall with that nonsense, you're gonna get smoted, because that's not true either. But no, I'm talking here about this this rhetoric that we have, and say I contend that they use Lincoln's persona, the one they created, not the real Lincoln, because the real Lincoln is written about in the book written by another one of Thomas De Lorenzo's book called The Real Lincoln is one of his books. He has another book out which I think people should read. It's called Lincoln Unmasked.
See, Lincoln's wife too. She had mental illness. They're two dysfunctional people.
Yes.
He had his issues. She had her issues. Plus, she also had, I think it was 6 or 7 Confederate generals she was related to.
Yeah, she was committed by her son. I forget which one of the sons it was, but one of her sons had her committed to an insane asylum because she had just lost it. Almost at the time of the death, there was a black woman that was a seamstress that worked for her named Elizabeth Cackley, and they were very close and was somewhat of a confidant. And she asked for Elizabeth Cackley after the news came that her husband had been shot, and then 2 days later he died. But that family had a lot of problems, and I would say that Abraham Lincoln had a lot of problems. This idea, the war that started in 1861, let's see, April the 12th, 1861, Lincoln had not been in office more than a month, a little bit more than a month at that time, a month and a month and 8 days, because he'd been inaugurated on March the 4th, 1861. And within a month and 8 days, Lincoln has claimed that the Fort Sumter, and I was in that fort, by the way, when I was doing some investigative work for the university. I went down with the department chair, and we had to do I did almost like a book on the what happened in the Sea Islands of South Carolina. You got Sea Islands in South Carolina and also Sea Islands in Georgia, and because they are off the coast, when the Union came into the southern states, because it's not attached to the land space, they would deliberate that they were able to take over that space earlier than they were the others. So given that they had conquered that part of the territory, because they abandoned it once the Union Army came into the Sea Islands, then they had blacks were you had the blacks that were no longer under the Southern plantation system. So I went down to do a study of that, and in the study, what we did as part of the field work we did, we went into Fort Sumter. I've been into Fort Sumter, and they have a wonderful guide there, and you'll learn a lot about the Civil War, at least the firing of Fort Sumter, that part of the Civil War that took place April the 12th, 1861. And you in that fort, and when you hear what happened, because what they were doing in that fort, that's just a side point, but doing that fort is that they were firing cannonballs, but the cannonballs they would heat them first. So those cannonballs they were fire. So when they would hit into that fort out there in Charleston Harbor, those cannonballs would hit in there, and a fire would start. So you know what those the ranking officers would do? They stay in the back of the fort, and they say the corporals are there in the front. that was what was going on there. But Lincoln, in reinforcing that fort, knew what was going to happen, because that fort was now on foreign soil. And he knew that he could not. See, Lincoln had a problem here. And the problem Lincoln had, John, listen very carefully. The problem that Lincoln had was that those states knew that all the states had the right to secession as the ultimate way of holding checks and balances in place of the federal government, and they all had, in fact, at one time threatened to use it, starting with Massachusetts. See, to me, the North was acting hypocritically, particularly Massachusetts, because how many times they threatened to secede from the Union? In 1803 with the Louisiana Purchase, 1807 with the Embargo Act, 1812 with the War of 1812. They kept saying that they did not agree with these national policies. And they had threatened to, in fact, secede from the Union because they felt there was overreach on the part of the federal government. Particularly when you begin to add these territories into the country that broke up the contract that they had at the founding of the country when they made a contract. And what was that contract? Let me ask these scholars that question. I know you don't have the answer. But the contract is between the states and the federal government that those states at that time had created. It wasn't the rest of the other states that were added later on. The contract was between the federal government and those states that were created by them relinquishing some of their power to the federal government to create the federal government. Otherwise, where would the power come from?
See that we're dealing with a similar situation. The Democrats right now, the progressives, don't want to admit that they say Trump's divisive and the right wing they're divisive. They do the same thing they accuse the right of.
Yeah.
The rights probably did have a little bit more longer period. Like people they think that Rush Limbaugh is inflammatory because whenever somebody's discussing what the government's do to you and telling you the truth, that's being inflammatory.
Yeah.
That's flamming the flames of hatred and stuff. No, if you just shut up and let them do it, nobody realizes all their rights are being taken from them.
The left feels you're inflammatory if you disagree with the left. They're out there throwing rocks up against buildings. They're up there smashing police officers' cars, and they're not being inflammatory. The inflammatory was with person like Milo. How do you pronounce that last name? You know,
your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah.
I'd say Yiannopoulos or something.
Yeah, something like
it's a Greek name. It's a Greek.
Yeah, great name. He's being provocative by wanting to give a presentation at Berkeley College. They're not being provocative by going up there tearing the school up. See, the left is never provocative. They're just simply, and we don't even understand that when they talk about Berkeley being the home of the free speech movement. That's nonsense.
William F. Buckley said that the left always encourages discourse and to change of opinions, and they're surprised that actually there is other opinions. Wow, wait a minute. You actually don't agree with me? And then they start calling the names, and it's like, well, why don't you lay out your reasons? No, we can't have that. We're superior because we're in the line of Marx. Marx is like such a great man. We could cite him. We got all these movements based upon him. Yeah, look at the bloodshed. And you guys are totally disregarding the horrors that Marx and Marxism have done over 100 some years, but that's fine,
Yeah, I get people on my wall, and they come on there and they'll say, I write a 4-page, I'm trying to cut my article down because I do not want to, take too much of people's time, but I do have a certain group of people that read what I write every day, and I write every day on Facebook. But they'll come on some of the people some of my critics, and I'm gonna fight every last one of them. But they go to my post, and they'll put down things like this right here. And I write about a 4-page article. They got to try to, and it's longer than that. When I wrote it, then I got to cut it down to 4 pages. I wish I could get it down to a page, but I can't. I seem like I can't make my case in that amount of space.
So you want to get background information, so you can't come out of the blue, so they can.
Yeah, that's another problem that I have.
What it is, yeah.
I need to be more. I need to work on being more precise, but at the same time, I need to be more comprehensive as well, because you're trying to write into a context. Maybe everybody does not understand the context in which you're writing. But somebody get on my wall, and they're all right. Okay, John. John told me we got to get out of here soon. 3 minutes, John said. So that's the time that I need. But they get on my wall and they'll say, I disagree. And they won't add anything to that. John has put on there, I disagree. And then they leave it at that. And that's the argument. In other words, I'm wrong because they disagree with the argument that I made. Not that they have a counter argument, but it's not the argument that they would have made if they had made an argument. Because they can't make an argument because, the left doesn't really have any argument. That's why they always argue with your argument, because it doesn't have any arguments of its own. And that's why they keep on arguing with Donald Trump. They don't have anything to say about what Donald Trump is trying to accomplish. If Donald Trump says he's trying to repeal and replace Obamacare, and he's trying to reduce the taxes in the country, he's getting rid of regulations and trying to get some of those regulations off the book that's killing jobs in this country, what are they going to say to counter that? They don't have anything to say. So they're on the attack against Donald Trump, because if they are not on the attack, they got to come up with their own plan, and they don't have a plan. They never had a plan. The Democrats don't have a plan, because what is the plan that will counteract the things that can you counteract the plan to make America great again? What are you going to say to that? You going to make America stagnant again? There's no counter measures to be taken.
Yeah, we don't want you to be prosperous. We want you to be dependent upon the system, because they don't want you to know that. That's what their intention is. They want you dependent upon the government because they don't want you to have freedom, because they don't want you to go somewhere else in life that they wouldn't want to see you go to.
Yeah.
They want to be the sole creators of your existence.
John, they're going to get a wake-up call. This election coming up right now, the special election they have in Georgia, that's going to be very important. It's going to be that take the finger and put it in the wind, see which way the wind is blowing. If that seat is not won by the Democrats, it's an open seat. If it's not won by the Democrats, that's a statement there that this noise they're making about Donald Trump is in fact not this way, and he's not getting this kind of support, and people out here against him, and he's not doing these things. The polls are showing that he's looked at as being incoherent. If they win that seat down in Georgia, then again, the narrative that they're running today has to be changed again, because people are not buying it. And I hope they will lose this seat, and I hope they'll lose in 2018, because it will force the Democrats to come out of the woodwork and put together a plan. And they don't have a plan. They want to critique and criticize and knock down and hide their agenda, because their agenda is anti-American. And that's why they have their agenda. And I think a lot of these problems, quite frankly, start with Abraham Lincoln. I have to come back and say that before we get off the air. And I would like people to read more about Lincoln, and one of the books I want them to read is this book I brought here. I won't be able to talk about it now, but I'll talk about it a lot more next week. And that's this book by Stephen Oates, great writer, not always honest, but he's a great writer. And his book here is called With Malice Toward None. And next week when we come, I promise you I'm going to talk about this book here, and also the book by De Lorenzo called Organized Crime. I need to talk about page 135 of that book. Okay, we have to get out of here. We always get a little bit beside ourselves, get a little bit, we sometimes become too comprehensive and sometimes not comprehensive enough, but we do the best we can. Okay, I want you to follow your dream, as always, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.